Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. This is the place where we really dig into these powerful, big ideas, these frameworks, and, well, we break them down completely. We want to turn them into actionable insights that you can use, especially if you're focused on learning, on getting smarter, faster, more effectively.
And today, we're definitely moving beyond just like simple productivity hacks. We're tackling something more fundamental. It's really a blueprint for psychological and behavioral change. Our source material today, it's built on the architecture of Stephen Covey's classic, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
That's right. But we're kind of setting aside the whole corporate angle for this conversation. We're dragging this whole framework right into the world of personal growth, building confidence, and crucially, that often complex journey of mastering a language. It's really this integrated blueprint, isn't it? Designed to show you that learning a language, well, successfully learning it, it's maybe less about raw talent and much more about having effective habits in place.
Exactly. And that really sets up our mission for this deep dive, doesn't it? We want to pull out the core principles, the sort of deep logic behind thinking better, acting better, and then connect all that directly to becoming a truly effective and resilient language learner. We're aiming for that kind of, comprehensive understanding that can genuinely transform how you approach your studies. Make sure you get the most bang for your buck, effort-wise.
Yeah, because let's face it, succeeding with something as complex as a new language, it takes more than just a good textbook or an app, right?
Yeah.
It really demands self-mastery, focus, knowing why you're doing it, that clarity of purpose, and also being able to, well, work well with others.
Absolutely. And the beauty of these habits, I think, is that they're not just like separate tricks. They build on each other. There's a cumulative effect. You start with what Covey called the private victory, that's mastering yourself. Then you move towards the public victory, mastering relationships. And it all culminates in this habit of renewal, which is key for making it last. We're going to explore how each step sort of tackles a common sticking point for language learners, where people often fail.
Okay, sounds good. Let's unpack this then. And I guess we have to start at the very beginning, right? That foundational layer, self-mastery. Starting with habit 1.
Habit 1, be proactive. Yeah, fundamentally, this is about ownership, taking charge. The core idea is choosing what you do instead of just waiting around for things to happen to you. It means you act based on your values, your goals, rather than just reacting to, whatever life throws at you, the circumstances.
And I think sometimes people gloss over the real psychological kick in that word, proactive. Pro meaning forward, and active meaning doing something, taking action. It's the absolute opposite of being reactive, isn't it? Which is where we kind of blame everything external for why we're not making progress. Like, oh, the weather's rubbish, or my teacher, they're just not engaging, or the classic, I just don't have enough time.
That's right. The sources, they define a reactive person as someone who's always focused on what Covey called the circle of concern. All those things you worry about but realistically can't change, the political situation, the economy, what other people think. The proactive person, though, they focus their energy differently. They concentrate on the circle of influence. These are the things you can actually do something about, like your personal effort, what you focus on each day, what your very next step is going to be.
Add that focus on the circle of influence. That sounds like the escape hatch from what you called the waiting trap. We hear this all the time, don't we? Learners saying they're just, waiting. Waiting for the perfect study plan or the right time to start, or maybe the biggest one. Waiting to feel confident before they actually dare to speak the language.
Oh, that waiting game is just paralyzing. It really is. And the fundamental insight here, and this is backed up by a lot of behavioral science, is that confidence doesn't arrive first. It doesn't precede the action. Confidence is actually manufactured by taking action. It comes after you've put in consistent daily effort, little bits of progress. You don't feel ready, so you hesitate, you don't start. But the thing is, you'll likely never feel fully ready until you have some proof that you can actually do it. And that proof only comes from those small, consistent acts of just showing up and trying.
I wonder, though, does money play a role here? What if someone genuinely can't afford, say, expensive lessons or a private tutor? Is using a free app or just recording your voice on your phone, is that really being proactive? Or is it maybe just, a sort of cheap workaround avoiding the real thing?
That's a really fair and important challenge, because if being proactive meant you had to spend money, then a lot of people would be completely stuck. But proactive behavior At its core, it's about making a choice within your current constraints. So if the choice is between passively waiting, hoping a paid opportunity magically appears, or actively choosing to use the free resources you do have available, like, free online language exchanges, self-recording tools, and really dedicating focused effort to them. Well, the second option is clearly the proactive one. It's about maximizing your influence over the situation you're actually in right now.
And the brain picks up on this, doesn't it? It's quite sensitive to it.
Yeah.
When you consistently follow through on what you planned, even if it's tiny, like reviewing 5 flashcards, your brain starts to, trust you more. It stops seeing you as the person who always puts things off and starts recognizing you as reliable, someone who does what they say they'll do. And that internal self-trust, that's got to be the bedrock for staying motivated long-term, right?
Exactly right. And we see this illustrated really, really well in the source material with the story about Isabel. She was completely stuck in that reactive mode, wasn't she? Her usual complaint was something like, oh, I can't practice my English speaking because, nobody wants to talk to me. So she was putting the problem outside herself, waiting for someone else to give her permission or validation to practice.
Right, but then she broke out of that cycle. She decided to be fiercely proactive about it. She realized, hang on, I don't actually need another person to start talking. I just need to start producing my own output.
Yeah.
So she committed to this small thing, recording her voice every single morning, just for 1 minute, talking about anything, really, her plans for the day, what she had for breakfast, maybe a weird dream she had. Simple stuff.
And the shift, apparently, was pretty immediate and quite remarkable because she'd taken back control. Her improvement wasn't dependent on getting feedback from others anymore. It was coming from her own internal feedback loop, hearing herself. And within just a few weeks, she started noticing, hey, my sentences are flowing a bit better. My pronunciation feels smoother. And this sort of basic self-assurance that she built that gave her the strength, the courage needed to take the next step. She finally felt ready to join one of those online English-speaking groups.
And the key thing is, when she did join, she wasn't going in there desperate for validation, right? She was sharing the progress she'd already made, coming from a place of, quiet confidence. And then she got this really positive, genuine feedback. People actually said things like, wow, your accent is beautiful, or commented on her clarity. And she realized, didn't she, that her success was directly down to her effort, not because someone else gave her the green light.
That's the absolute essence of taking responsibility. It's what the sources really hammer home. You have to stop that victim narrative. Stop blaming the teacher, the weather, the economy, your busy job, whatever it is, and just declare, okay, my results, they come from my focused effort, period. You essentially become the captain of your own learning ship.
Yeah, the ship analogy. That really works here. You're the captain. You can't control the wind, right? Those are the external circumstances, the unexpected storms life throws at you, maybe a sudden job change. You can't control that. But your power, your entire power, lies in how you adjust the sails and how you hold the steering wheel. And that control directly translates into how you react day to day and what you choose as your very next step. You decide the effort, and critically, you decide the direction.
And that leads us perfectly into the next habit. Because being proactive means you're the one driving, absolutely, but you've got to know where you're actually driving to. #TagsTag22. Begin with the end in mind, clarity of direction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so habit 2. This is all about the mental creation that comes before the physical creation. It really insists that before you take even that first physical step, you need to have a super clear mental picture of your destination. Where are you actually heading? If habit 1 is deciding, okay, I'm going to drive the car, then habit 2 is choosing the map and the specific place you want to arrive at.
It's a planning metaphor again, isn't it? But applied squarely to learning. If you're planning a big trip, say a holiday to another country, you don't just book a random train ticket and hope for the best, do you? No, you choose the specific destination first, Paris, Tokyo, Rio, whatever, and then you work backwards, planning the flights, the hotels, the route to get there from that end goal. Learning has to follow that same basic architecture, doesn't it?
It really does. But the problem, the big pitfall, is when learners get caught in what we could call the too broad trap. Setting the goal like, I want to learn English. Well, honestly, that's almost uselessly vague. It's too big, too fuzzy. It tends to generate anxiety because there's no clear finish line. There's no way to measure your progress against it. You absolutely have to define why you're learning and maybe even more importantly, what specifically you want to be able to do with the language. And you need to define that in pretty specific detail.
Yeah, and this demands a certain linguistic precision in goal setting itself.
Yeah.
Right, the source material puts it nicely. Each stream needs a different road. That really resonates. Like, if your goal is to get, say, B2 level fluency for academic writing, maybe you want to publish research papers internationally, then you need a really deep focus on complex grammar, formal vocabulary, understanding passive structures, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But if your goal is, let's say, C1 level for having spontaneous, persuasive conversations, maybe debating current events, well, that requires a totally different focus. You need intense practice with listening comprehension at native speed, loads of idiomatic expressions, and really working on active fluid speaking, producing language quickly. The practice methods you choose have to be radically different depending on that specific end goal.
Right. So if your declared end game is speaking fluency, then spending, say, 5 hours a week just reading advanced novels, while that might feel productive and academically stimulating, it's actually pretty inefficient for that particular goal, isn't it?
Highly inefficient. Your focus has to shift immediately towards output practice. Things like shadowing native speakers, recording yourself daily, joining conversation clubs, seeking out live interaction wherever you can find it. That clarity of purpose stops you from wasting precious time and mental energy on activities that don't really move the needle towards your specific goal.
Okay, but that brings up something I hear a lot, goal anxiety. What if the goal just feels massive? If I say my goal is C1 fluency, that feels like it could be years away. It's potentially overwhelming. How do we stop this end in mind thing from actually becoming demotivating?
That's a great question. And the answer, I think, lies in breaking down the idea of the end into different levels, like a hierarchy. Covey talks about this concept of dual creation. He says everything is created twice. First, it's created in the mind as a vision or a plan. And second, it's created in physical reality through action. So if your ultimate destination is that C1 fluency, then you need intermediate destinations. These become your stepping stones along the way, your shorter term ends.
So you're saying we should apply the begin with the end in mind idea, not just to the big overall goal, but also to like our daily study sessions.
Precisely. That's exactly it. Before you even start that, say, 30-minute study block, you ask yourself, okay, what's my specific immediate end for this session? And the goal might be quite small, quite minute. Maybe it's just to really get my head around these 3 specific phrasal verbs, or to understand 80% of the idioms used in this short podcast clip. When you actually complete that small specific task, you get this little hit of accomplishment, right? Which feels good and reinforces the study habit. That kind of micro success is what helps combat the macro anxiety about the huge long-term goal.
The sources mentioned a really practical exercise for this mental creation part, writing down 3 I can sentences. And the language shift there seems critical. It's not, I hope I can, or I wish I could, but framing it as I can. Like, I can talk about my job and my career goals in English for 5 minutes without stumbling too much, or I can understand, say, 80% of a documentary on a topic I know, even at native speed.
Yeah, those I can sentences are really powerful because they define a concrete, measurable skill, not just some vague wish or aspiration. And then once you've got that clear vision, that mental creation, you have to map the actions backward from it. This is what the sources call action mapping. So if your end goal is, say, talking freely for 5 minutes about your work, your action map might start with something like, month 1, I need to master introducing myself and talking about my daily routine. Month 2, okay, focus on mastering maybe 2 key tenses, like past simple and present perfect, so I can describe past experiences. Month 3, right, now I'll work on expressing opinions about, current events or hobbies.
It makes sure that every single practice session, every resource you pick up, every app you use is actually serving that bigger purpose you've defined. You stop feeling kind of lost or just dabbling because you've set the coordinates. You know where you're going. And that clarity you get from habit 2, that's really what makes the effective execution in habit 3 even possible, isn't it?
Absolutely. It connects right back to that strong concluding thought from the material. Achieving fluency in the end, it's not going to happen by luck or because you were born with some special talent. It'll happen because you consciously chose to begin with the end in mind, and then you systematically engineered your own journey to get there, step by step.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me and probably for a lot of listeners. We've got the internal drive sorted, right, being proactive, and we've got the clear map, beginning with the end in mind. But the biggest struggle, often, is actually doing it. Executing that plan amidst the chaos of everyday life. Habit 3 seems to be all about how we manage that precious, limited resource of time and energy.
Exactly. Habit 3 is the execution habit. It's the discipline, the willpower. Choose the most important tasks, what Covey calls the first things, and do them before you do anything else. If you've clearly defined your end back in habit 2, then habit 3 is what compels you to focus your limited daily energy on the activities that will actively move you closer to that goal.
Right. But this is exactly where that trap lies, isn't it? The busy versus productive trap. So many learners feel completely swamped. They might spend, hours flicking through Duolingo, reading a few news articles online, maybe listening passively to a podcast while cooking. And yet they report feeling like they're stuck, not really moving forward. They're confusing being busy with being productive. They're confusing urgent with important.
Yeah, that distinction, that quadrant thinking, is really the heart of effective time management, isn't it? Something that's urgent, it demands your attention right now. It's usually loud, a phone notification pinging, an email alert flashing, a looming deadline. It operates in the immediate present. But something that's important, that contributes directly to your long-term mission, your habit 2 goal, it requires conscious intention, planning. It operates with an eye on the future.
And the real tragedy, the trap, is spending all your time just reacting to urgent things that are actually not important in the grand scheme of things. Like, feeling compelled to answer every single non-critical email the second it arrives, or getting sucked into scrolling social media feeds just because they're constantly updating and demanding that immediate reaction.
For the language learner, this often manifests as endless consumption without any real production. It might feel urgent to binge watch that new popular series in your target language because everyone's talking about it online. But unless you follow it up with some active production like talking about it, writing about it, it might not actually be that important for improving your active vocabulary or speaking skills. What is truly important? Maybe spending 20 minutes actively reviewing those 50 high-frequency words you learned last week and forcing yourself to use them in new sentences. That task rarely feels urgent. There's no deadline flashing. But that is what actually builds mastery over time.
So the entire habit really pivots on choosing to do those important tasks first, even when they feel quiet, maybe a bit harder to start, or don't give that immediate dopamine hit. And this is where that jar analogy comes in, right? It visualizes this perfectly.
Yeah, the jar analogy is brilliant for illustrating the sort of zero-sum nature of our time and this challenge of prioritization. Imagine you have an empty jar. The big stones represent your truly important high-impact activities. For a learner, that's things like focused study periods, maybe deliberate speaking practice, protecting your health, getting enough sleep. Then you have the sand. That represents all the small, noisy, time-wasting stuff that tends to fill up our days, endless notifications, mindlessly scrolling through feeds, low-value interruptions, emails that could wait.
And the rule is just crystal clear, isn't it? If you pour the sand into the jar first, it quickly fills up the whole container. And then there's no room left, or maybe just some awkward, tiny gaps for your big stones. They just won't fit. But if you make a conscious choice to put the big stones in the jar first, like scheduling that 20 minutes of dedicated speaking practice, then the sand and maybe some smaller pebbles, like checking emails or a quick browse online, they'll just naturally settle into the spaces around the big, important stuff. Your crucial tasks are secured because you prioritize them.
The implication is huge. It means we have to stop just waiting for free time to magically appear in our schedule. Because it rarely does, right? As the source material puts it so well, the key is not simply to prioritize what's already on your schedule, but to actively schedule your priorities. You have to proactively carve out and protect that time for your big stones before the urgent demands of the day inevitably rush in and consume everything.
Okay, but this brings up probably the most pressing modern challenge to actually doing habit 3. The sand today isn't just sand. It's like digital superglue, isn't it? We're not just dealing with, paper mail anymore. We're fighting against these hyper-optimized notifications and feeds specifically designed by tech companies to create addictive urgency and hijack our attention. How do the sources suggest we break that specific digital addiction cycle to protect our focus time?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question today, isn't it? The sources are pretty clear that this requires deliberate management of both your physical and your digital environment. Physical distance is actually crucial. If your big stone task is, say, focused reading for 30 minutes, your phone can't just be silenced on the desk next to you. That's often not enough. Ideally, it needs to be in another room entirely, or at least physically placed somewhere that accessing it requires effort, requires friction. You have to get up to get it. Because research shows that the mere proximity of the device, even if it's off or silent, can still activate that urgency center in your brain and drain your cognitive resources.
That friction idea is key. Making the easy thing like grabbing your phone and scrolling harder to do, and making the hard thing like sitting down for focused study a bit easier by removing those immediate temptations.
And then digitally, implementing a specific time management strategy like the Pomodoro technique can really help reinforce focus on the important tasks. By committing to just, say, 15 or 20 minutes of pure, uninterrupted focus, literally no phone checking, no switching browser tabs, unless it's directly related to the task, you build up this deep work momentum. The sources argue, quite convincingly I think, that just 15 minutes of truly focused quadrant 2 work, important but not urgent, is often far more valuable than maybe an hour spent constantly task switching and reacting to every single notification that pops up.
And since, let's be honest, failure is going to happen, we all get distracted sometimes, life happens, that practical rule for maintaining momentum seems really important. Don't miss 2 days in a row.
Exactly. Missing one day, okay, maybe you were tired, something came up, it happens. But missing 2 days in a row, that starts to establish a new negative habit pattern. And it becomes exponentially harder to get back on track after that. Keep the streak alive, even if it's just for 5 minutes some days.
This discipline, it also means protecting your future self.
Right.
By learning to set boundaries now, saying no, or maybe just later, to those small, unimportant requests that pop up, even if they come from colleagues or friends who maybe don't fully understand your language learning priorities, that act of saying no is actually a powerful affirmation of your commitment to your long-term goal.
Absolutely. When you practice this habit consistently, you move beyond just being busy. You start being truly effective, actively building that foundation for fluency, one prioritized block of time at a time. Okay, so we've covered the private victories, right? We're proactive, driving the car. We begin with the end in mind. We have the map, and we put first things first. We're fueling the car with the right stuff and focusing on the important part of the journey. But language, by its very nature, it's a shared thing. It exists between people. So we have to move beyond just mastering ourselves and step into the relational sphere, how we interact with others in our learning.
Right. Transitioning out of that purely personal study bubble, now we're entering the territory of interdependence, relying on and contributing to others. And habit 4, think win-win. This sounds absolutely essential if you want to actually leverage shared learning environments like conversation groups or study partners successfully. #4. Think win-win. Cooperation over competition. So thinking win-win, it means actively looking for situations where both sides, or ideally all sides, can benefit. Everyone gets something positive out of the interaction. This seems to demand a pretty massive psychological shift, doesn't it? Moving away from that default competitive zero-sum, limited resource mindset that often surrounds achievement and learning.
Oh, absolutely. In a traditional competitive mindset, what Covey calls win-lose, people often operate under the assumption that if I win, you must lose. You know, if I get the top grade, someone else doesn't. Or in a language group, if you speak more fluently than me right now, I somehow feel diminished or less capable. And this way of thinking, it breeds comparison, jealousy, fear of making mistakes, fear of failure, all of which are incredibly toxic for the kind of open, vulnerable process that language learning requires.
But the core insight here from the sources is that language learning fundamentally isn't a zero-sum game, is it? If your study partner suddenly makes a breakthrough and achieves C1 fluency, that doesn't magically delete vocabulary from your brain. If anything, it should be motivating. It validates that the journey is possible. Your success should really be measured against your own progress compared to yesterday, not against how well someone else is doing right now.
The psychological benefit of truly adopting win-win is immense. You genuinely stop those draining negative internal comparisons. You shift from feeling that pang of jealousy when someone else does well to actually feeling happy for them. You start seeing their success as proof, maybe even as a kind of motivational beacon. It sends the message, wow, if they manage to finally crack that tricky grammar point, then maybe I can too. It makes success feel more achievable for everyone.
And this kind of environment, built on mutual trust and support, that must be crucial for overcoming the fear of speaking, right? Which is arguably the biggest single blocker for so many language learners. If you genuinely believe that your conversation partner isn't secretly judging every little mistake you make, you're going to be far more willing to take those necessary risks, to push your comfort zone, to actually try speaking.
Definitely. And the sources are careful to point out that win-win is fundamentally a philosophy of respect. It's not about being a doormat. It doesn't mean you just automatically agree to everything someone else wants or constantly put your own needs aside in a kind of lose-win scenario, letting others take advantage. No, it's about finding a balance. It requires both courage the willingness to clearly state your own needs and desired outcomes, and consideration, the genuine effort to understand and respect the needs and desired outcomes of the other person.
Okay, let's think about a practical challenge here. What if you find yourself with a study partner who seems naturally quite competitive? Maybe they tend to interrupt a lot or they dominate the conversation, always steering it to topics they want to discuss. If I just passively let them dominate, well, then I lose out. Right, that's lose-win. But if I try to interrupt back aggressively or shut them down, we probably both end up feeling frustrated and the learning atmosphere is ruined. That sounds like lose-lose.
Exactly. That's where the balance of win-win becomes a crucial communication skill, not just a nice idea. You need to use language that is assertive about your needs, but still respectful of the relationship and their perspective. So if your partner always wants to discuss, say, politics, but you desperately need to practice for an upcoming job interview presentation, the win-win approach isn't just to silently fume or give up. It's about negotiation.
Right. So the win-win response might sound something like, hey, I really enjoy our discussions about politics and I definitely want to keep having them. But just to make sure I get the practice I need for my interview, could we maybe dedicate the first 10 minutes of our session tomorrow, specifically to running through my presentation draft? That way we both get something valuable out of our time.
Precisely. You acknowledge their interest first. That's the consideration part. But then you clearly and courageously state your own need and propose a specific solution that allows both needs to be met. This kind of approach actively builds trust, which is the essential infrastructure needed for any effective collaboration. And that focus on understanding the other person's needs leads us directly into the next habit 5, which is all about the art of real connection through listening. #tag 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Deep listening. Okay, habit 5. This one is often cited as perhaps the most difficult habit to master in practice. Why? Because it requires us to consciously suppress our very natural, very human impulse to immediately jump in with our own opinion or response. Instead, the focus shifts entirely to empathetic listening. You have to genuinely strive to understand the other person's ideas, their perspective, their frame of reference before you even begin to think about formulating or articulating your own reply.
Wow. In a language learning context, that feels like it goes way beyond just translating the words someone is saying. So many learners, myself included sometimes, we listen just enough to grab the main vocabulary so we can start mentally constructing our grammatically perfect response, right? We're essentially listening in order to talk, not listening purely to absorb and comprehend.
Exactly. And when you listen only with the intent to reply, you miss out on a huge amount of valuable information that the speaker is providing, often non-verbally or implicitly. You miss the tone of voice, the register they're using, formal, informal, the cultural nuances embedded in their phrasing, and crucially, the underlying emotional intent behind their words. Covey calls the alternative empathetic listening. It's listening with a genuine intent to understand the speaker's point of view, trying to see the world just for a moment through their eyes.
For a language learner, this skill seems doubly vital. It's not just about being polite. It's about improving your own comprehension speed and the quality of your eventual output, isn't it? When you truly absorb how the other person is structuring their sentences, their rhythm, their cadence, your brain starts to subconsciously pick up on those patterns and model them, which should, theoretically, lead to much more natural-sounding, less stilted speech production when it's your turn to talk.
Think about the cognitive load involved, too. If you're busy formulating your brilliant reply in your head while the other person is still speaking, you're effectively splitting your mental bandwidth, right? You're dedicating maybe half your brain power to interpreting the incoming message and the other half to constructing your outgoing one. This severely limits your capacity for deep, nuanced understanding of what's actually being said.
But if you commit fully to understanding first, you deliberately slow down that internal mental rush. You dedicate, ideally, 100% of your cognitive resources just to processing the input, the words, the tone, the context. And often, once you fully grasp the other person's idea and their intent, crafting your response becomes much easier, more relevant, and, perhaps ironically, often quicker because you're not fighting against misunderstanding.
And here's the relational magic trick, based on solid psychology. When the other person genuinely feels heard, when they feel like you've understood not just their words, but their intention, maybe even their feelings, they relax, their defense is lower, and they become significantly more open and receptive to actually listening to you in return. It's reciprocal. By giving understanding freely, you dramatically increase the chances of receiving it back.
Okay, so these two relational habits, thinking win-win, habit 4, and seeking first to understand, habit 5, They're like the necessary bridge, aren't they? They take us from isolated individual practice into the realm of high-quality, mutually beneficial interaction, which then presumably unlocks the potential for exponential growth through the next habit, synergy. Right? We've laid all the groundwork now. We've got the personal mastery, the relational skills. Habit 6, synergize. This feels like where the real breakthrough potential kicks in. The power of combining efforts to create something bigger. This is where your learning rate could really start to accelerate, potentially becoming exponential. Hashtag tag 6. Synergize. Creating more than the sum of parts.
Synergy. Yeah, in simple terms, it's the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The outcome you get when people work together effectively is far bigger and better than what those same people could achieve working alone. It's the result of truly valuing and leveraging differences, respecting diverse perspectives and skills. It's where 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, but maybe 3 or 4 or even more.
The classic analogy they often use is the car pushing one, right? One person trying to push a stalled car uphill. They struggle massively, might completely exhaust themselves, and maybe the car doesn't even budge. But get two people pushing together, coordinating their effort. They combine their strength and energy, and suddenly the car moves with significantly more ease and speed. That collaborative force unlocks a totally different level of power.
And for language learners, this translates directly to recognizing that studying only by yourself, while absolutely essential for building discipline and foundational knowledge, is ultimately insufficient if your goal is real-world, functional fluency. Language is communication, by definition, and communication inherently requires interaction with others. Synergy in learning comes from that interaction. It exposes you to different accents you need to understand, different ways of phrasing things, different opinions and cultural viewpoints you'd simply never encounter in a textbook or an app.
Okay. But when learners try to form study groups, they often run into problems with organization, don't they? Sometimes it just devolves into unstructured chatting, or maybe one person does all the work. They might think collaboration just means we all talk together. But the sources seem to suggest that a deeper, more intentional structure is needed to really capture that 1 + 1 = 3 effect and avoid pitfalls like groupthink or unequal contributions. How do we structure group work effectively to actually maximize synergy?
That's a really key point. The secret often lies in having specialized roles and deliberately planning for diversity within the group's activities. Instead of everyone just vaguely trying to do the same thing, the group benefits immensely if members can identify and leverage their individual strengths or interests. Maybe you designate roles, even rotating ones. You might need someone who's really keen on vocabulary, someone who enjoys digging into grammar rules, someone who's good at initiating conversation topics, and maybe someone who feels comfortable gently coaching pronunciation.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you maybe flesh out that study group example you mentioned?
Sure. Imagine you have a small group, maybe 4 learners who meet regularly. Person A, let's call them the vocabulary virtuoso, spends some time each week researching high-frequency idioms or phrasal verbs relevant to a chosen topic and then teaches them to the group. Person B, the grammar guru, maybe reviews recordings of the group's practice conversations, identifies a common structural error, perhaps misuse of the subjunctive mood, and then dedicates 5 or 10 minutes to clearly explaining the correct usage. Person C, the pronunciation partner, focuses on listening for clarity and offers specific, constructive, non-judgmental feedback on tricky sounds or intonation patterns. And person D, the story starter, takes responsibility for keeping the conversation flowing, making sure everyone gets a chance to speak, maybe by preparing some interesting questions or prompts.
Okay, I can see how that works. Together, they achieve way more than they could individually, right? Because they're actively teaching each other, correcting misconceptions, and benefiting from focused input in areas they might not have prioritized as studying alone. They get exposed to specialized knowledge. But what about the potential risk if the group is made up entirely of non-native speakers? Is there a danger of them just reinforcing each other's mistakes, the sort of a blind leading the blind scenario?
That's a valid concern, and it's definitely a risk, especially if all the members are at a very beginner level, say A1 or maybe early A2. However, even then, the synergy can still be incredibly valuable, particularly if the primary goal is building basic speaking confidence and fluency, just getting comfortable producing the language without freezing up. And crucially, if the group also embraces habit 5, seek first to understand they won't just guess. They'll actively seek external verification for things they're unsure about. For instance, the grammar guru's job isn't just to state their opinion on a rule, it's to perhaps research it using reliable sources and then bring back the verified information to share with the group. Synergy, when done well, should actually minimize the risk of error propagation through shared responsibility and cross-checking.
And this idea of synergy, it doesn't just apply to groups, does it? The sources talked about internal synergy too, combining different skills within your own individual learning process. Because many learners tend to treat reading, writing, speaking, and listening as completely separate, siloed activities.
Yeah, and they really shouldn't. The brain learns much faster and retains information better through association and multisensory engagement. Internal synergy means consciously interleaving these skills. So for example, instead of just reading an article, you could read a challenging news story. That's input. Then, immediately after, try to talk about the main points aloud to yourself. That's output. Then maybe write a short one-paragraph summary of the key arguments that focuses on structure and vocabulary recall. And finally, perhaps find a podcast or video where native speakers are discussing the same topic and listen intently. That's reinforcement, modeling, and further input.
That connectivity between the skills, it creates much stronger memory traces, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Better consolidation, better transfer effects.
Yeah.
You're not just learning a new vocabulary word in isolation. You're hearing it, saying it, reading it, writing it. You're linking it across multiple neural pathways in your brain. It's, like you said before, it's like commissioning a whole orchestra to play the tune instead of just relying on a single flute player. It's richer, more robust.
Exactly. Synergy, both internal and external, can take your progress and really make it exponential, but such intense, focused learning effort, it takes energy, it requires maintenance. Otherwise, you inevitably hit a wall, you face burnout. And that brings us logically and essentially to the final habit, the one that keeps the whole engine running smoothly. #7. Sharpen the saw.
Renewal, habit 7. Sharpen the saw. This one. It's often seen as the sort of soft habit, maybe the nice to have if you've got time,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But the reality, according to Covey and backed up by performance science, is that it's actually the non-negotiable insurance policy for making sure all the other habits can be sustained over the long haul. The analogy of the woodcutter is just perfect, isn't it? The guy furiously sawing away at a tree, sweating, struggling, getting nowhere fast, and someone suggests he's stopped for a few minutes to sharpen his saw, and he snaps back, "I can't stop, I'm too busy sawing."
Yeah, the irony is so powerful, isn't it? By refusing to invest just 10 minutes to sharpen the tool, the woodsman ends up spending hours fighting against a dull blade, getting increasingly frustrated, expending way more energy, and ultimately achieving less. And the exact same thing happens to the student who just pushes and pushes themselves, relentlessly studying for hours on end, sacrificing sleep, ignoring fatigue until they become completely exhausted, bored, demotivated, and lose all the initial excitement for learning. They don't realize their own physical and mental capacity has become dull. They need renewal.
So renewal, in this context, it isn't about being lazy or taking an undeserved break. It's a planned, necessary, proactive activity itself. It means consciously taking care of the 4 key dimensions of yourself, your body, your mind, your heart or emotions, and your spirit to ensure you can maintain that upward spiral of growth without crashing and burning.
And we really need to tackle the common guilt that many high achievers, including dedicated learners, feel about resting. Rest is not the opposite of productive work. It's an essential component of sustainable, productive work. Feeling tired, feeling slow, feeling like your brain isn't working, that's not a sign of moral failing or lack of discipline. It's usually a clear biological signal that your saw is dull, and trying to just push through brute force will only lead to diminishing returns, frustration, and potential burnout.
Okay, let's break down those 4 dimensions of renewal that the sources detail, starting with the physical one, the body.
1, body, the engine. Yeah, this is absolutely foundational. If your physical engine is sputtering, if you're sleep deprived, dehydrated, poorly nourished, your capacity for complex cognitive tasks, which language learning definitely requires, is going to be severely compromised. So renewal here means prioritizing things that are often the first to go when we get busy. Getting sufficient high-quality sleep, that's non-negotiable for memory consolidation, staying properly hydrated, eating reasonably well, and incorporating some kind of movement into your day. Even just a short walk, some stretching during a long study session. That's not a distraction from learning. It's an act of sharpening the saw that will likely increase the quality and focus of your next study block. Sleep especially is when the brain does its vital housekeeping, consolidating memories and strengthening those neural pathways you built during your study time.
Okay, body covered. Next step 2, mind. How do we actively sharpen the mind when we're already using it so intensively for studying grammar rules and vocabulary lists? Doesn't it get sharp enough?
Sharpening the mind in this context isn't necessarily about doing more drills. It's about keeping it active, curious, and engaged, but often in ways that feel less like work and more like intellectual nourishment. It could mean reading interesting material in English, but maybe on topics you're genuinely passionate about outside of language learning itself, blogs, articles, maybe even technical stuff related to your hobbies or work. Things that stretch your thinking but feel enjoyable, maybe watching interesting documentaries or talks, perhaps using subtitles selectively to ensure you're actively listening and processing, not just passively absorbing. The goal is to prevent the mind from becoming stale or bored from the routine of pure study tasks. Keep that curiosity alive.
Right. Makes sense. Then we have 3, heart emotions relationships. This feels important too, because language learning can be a really emotionally taxing journey, can't it? You're constantly facing your own limitations, making mistakes, maybe feeling judged or corrected.
Absolutely. A worried, anxious, or isolated heart learns much slower than a calm, connected, and secure one. Renewal of the heart dimension involves actively nurturing positive relationships and managing your emotional state. This could mean connecting with people who provide genuine encouragement and positive energy, maybe sharing your learning goals and struggles with supportive fellow learners, friends, or family who understand. Your emotional well-being is a direct part of your learning capacity. If you're feeling constantly stressed, isolated, or anxious about your progress, your focus, memory, and motivation will inevitably suffer. This is where the trust and positive relationships built through habits 4 and 5 really pay off in providing that emotional support system.
And finally, the 4th dimension. 4, spirit, overall health purpose. This sounds a bit more abstract. What does sharpening the saw mean here?
This dimension is about maintaining your overall sense of energy, purpose, and connection to your values, including your end in mind from habit 2. It's about keeping that inner fire alive. And crucially, the sources cleverly incorporate the practice of review into this spiritual renewal dimension. This is key. So many students fall into the trap of constantly seeking new material, the next shiny app, the next advanced course, believing that novelty alone equals progress. But a core part of sharpening the saw spiritually in a learning context is taking time to regularly review and refresh the knowledge and skills you've already acquired. Going back over old vocabulary lists, consciously reusing grammar structures you learned months ago. This active review doesn't just prevent forgetting, it actively strengthens those neural connections, transferring knowledge from fragile short-term memory into robust, accessible long-term fluency. Plus, reviewing successfully gives you a tangible sense of mastery and progress, which fuels your motivation and reinforces your sense of purpose. It ensures your foundation is solid before you try to build the next level. It keeps your energy positive.
Wow, that's a great way to frame review, not as a chore, but as part of renewal. It really fits the tree analogy they sometimes use, doesn't it? You have to consistently water the whole tree, your entire self, to allow it to grow tall and strong sustainably. If you take care of your energy, if you keep your saw sharp across all these dimensions, your growth in language learning will be much more consistent, robust, and, well, sustainable over the months and years it takes.
That's the ultimate aim, isn't it? The 7 habits, taken together, provide a framework for maintaining that essential balance. They help prevent burnout, ensure the effort you put in is high quality and meaningful, keep you connected to your vision, and allow you to execute your plans efficiently day after day. Hashtag tag outro.
And that brings us towards the end of this really quite deep dive, I think, into applying these 7 powerful habits specifically to the journey of language mastery. We've walked through that whole crucial progression, haven't we? Starting with those vital private victories of self-mastery being proactive, beginning with the end in mind and putting first things first. Then moving into the public victories, how we interact effectively with others, thinking win-win, seeking folks to understand, and then unlocking that power of synergy. And finally, wrapping it all up with the essential habit of continuous growth and self-care, sharpening the saw.
Yeah, and it's so important to remember these aren't just, corporate jargon or abstract management buzzwords. They are practical psychological tools. They provide the mental architecture you need to handle the inevitable friction and challenges of learning something complex like a language. They give you the structure to stay calm when progress feels frustratingly slow, the tools to keep your momentum going when motivation inevitably dips, and the focus to ensure that the precious time you do invest is genuinely high-quality, effective effort.
When you start to really integrate these principles, you begin to shift, don't you? You stop feeling like you're just being passively swept along by circumstances, kind of vaguely hoping that fluency will just happen someday. And instead, you start feeling like you are actively, deliberately, consciously building that fluent version of yourself. Piece by focused, prioritized piece.
And maybe we can leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought, something that ties that discipline back to your ultimate purpose. When you inevitably feel that drag, that resistance to sitting down for your daily study, when discipline feels like a real chore, a genuine burden, try this. Take just a moment, close your eyes perhaps, and vividly recall that picture you created for yourself back in Habit 2. Remember that fluent version of you. Maybe it's the confident traveler navigating a new city, the successful professional nailing an international presentation, the person connecting deeply with new friends in their native tongue. Hold on to that image.
Because that final result, being able to speak, write, or understand with ease and confidence, it's not going to be a consequence of luck, is it? Or random chance. It will be a direct consequence of your deliberate planning and consistent action. So maybe take a look back at Habit 3. Identify that one piece of sand, the one recurring distraction or time waster that most often seems to clog up your day and steal your focus. Maybe it's checking a particular social media app 10 times an hour without thinking. Maybe it's getting lost in unimportant emails first thing. Consider making a commitment right now, today, to consciously relocate or remove that specific piece of sand from your routine tomorrow. Clear out that space. Make room for your big stones. What's the one small, truly important thing you can commit to securing time for first thing tomorrow?